I'm so far behind on the Patreon and Subscribestar Q&As that I thought I'd attempt to do a big video where I hammer out a lot of the smaller questions that don't really warrant their own videos. Some are new, some are old, some are tanks, some are banks, and timestamps are in the description so you can skip ahead if you need to. Let's get on with it. David E. Dyrod said, "Here's a question I've been dying to have you answer since I watched Battlestorm Stalingrad episode 18. Let's say you were a German field marshal at the September 12, 1942 conference with the Führer and all those other top brass. What strategic changes would you have recommended? Other than the obvious answer, surrender now, the sooner we quit, the less evil we'll cause. I'm hoping for a speculative alternate history from you. What do you think the Germans could have held on to through the winter of 1942-43 if they had understood the true strategic situation before they exhausted themselves fighting their way into Stalingrad? Could they have foiled Operation Uranus the way they had foiled Mars, or would the Germans have had to withdraw to more defensible positions before winter? For example, if they hadn't lost 6th Army, could they have held on to Rostov and Mayakop until the spring thaw brought on the usual stalemate? Might this have left the Germans in a stronger negotiating position during the secret peace talks hosted by Sweden between April and June 1943? How might the overall strategic situation have differed by spring 1943 if the Germans had made better choices, with or without the benefit of hindsight? When I was a kid, it was assumed that the loss of the 6th Army at Stalingrad shortened the war dramatically, but these days there is a perception of historical inevitability. I tend to disagree with the inevitability argument in most contexts, including this one. What do you think?" Great question, but tough to answer. I think by the time you're at the 12th of September, with Paulus about to march into Stalingrad itself, you're already locked into that fighting. It doesn't make sense to stop him to try and take Stalingrad, so the only thing you can do now is get as many divisions into the city as possible. This does mean weakening the flanks, or shipping in additional battalions from the Reich or whatever, but that's their only real option if we want to take the city. In reality, they delayed bringing up reinforcements until later, causing the battle to grind on until they lost. Now, there is the logistical issue, but in theory, they haven't put the Romanian army on the Don yet, so potentially there was some logistical wriggle room to allow German divisions to move into the area. It is implied at the conference that they don't have any additional German divisions spare, but this might not be entirely true. The Romanians were pulled out of the south and sent north. If they had recognised and accepted that Grozny, Baku and the rest of the Caucasus weren't going to be captured, then they could have pulled out either von Kleist's 1st Panzer Army or Ruoff's 17th Army instead of the Romanians. Having them on the Don flank instead of the Romanians might have been the better strategy, especially because it wouldn't have meant the flank would have been so weak. It may have also spared a German division or two to go to Stalingrad at this stage, helping Paulus win that battle. Alternatively, they could have reinforced Hoth's 4th Panzer Army to take the area south of Stalingrad, shortening the lines and freeing up additional divisions to then be used to bolster the line there or at Stalingrad, before eventually heading off to the Don, so the mistake might have been moving the Romanians out of the Caucasus instead of a German army. Realistically, if they did move the Germans out, then it would have to have been Ruoff's 17th Army. Why? Because if they were moving them to the Don flank, you don't want a Panzer Army sat there on the defence, so I think they would have chosen the 17th Army. In September, 17th Army had 5 German infantry divisions, 2 Jaeger divisions, 2 German mountain divisions, the SS Viking motorised division, the Slovak Mobile Division, and 4 Romanian divisions. Obviously, you don't want mountain or even mobile divisions on the Don, so some of these could have been swapped with divisions from 1st Panzer Army. If the Romanian and mobile divisions had been kept in Army Group A, and had the mountain divisions at least been swapped for infantry divisions, then that's 7 German infantry and 2 Jaeger divisions that could be moved north rather than the Romanians. That certainly would have been a major help to Paulus and Hoth, even if they just sat on the Don instead of the Romanians. They did move the Romanians to the Don flank because they wanted to form a Romanian army group in the Stalingrad area, and they wanted German forces in the Caucasus to take more oil fields. But in our alternative history scenario, knowing that the Don flank is the weak point, and knowing that they wouldn't have got to the oil fields anyway, scrapping the Romanian army group idea and instead placing a German army on the Don may have prevented Operation Uranus from being successful. Maybe the Italians and Hungarians would still have collapsed, but then you'd not have the 6th Army surrounded at Stalingrad and they would be able to pull back, saving a lot of men and material, so it is the better option. It's still far from ideal though, and there's a danger that the Caucasus would have been extremely weak, having been stripped of 9 German divisions, but I still think this setup is far more flexible than what happened in reality. It gives them more options for when things go wrong, which I think is what the focus should have been in this current scenario. You know, if you're splitting an army group into 2 and sending them off in different directions, and one is to guard the flank, you want that one to be as strong as possible to allow the other one to retreat in the event that things go wrong. I'm not sure on the logistics of it, but theoretically this may have allowed the Germans to hold on to Mayakop and the Northern Caucasus into 1943, and kept all the German armies operational. And that means the Soviets would have been in trouble in 1943 simply because there was a lack of food. Without the food from the Caucasus and the victory at Stalingrad, they may have suffered a huge morale crisis. Perhaps they wouldn't have outright collapsed, but it may have been enough to reduce Soviet offensive capabilities. An army marches on its stomach, and this may have been enough to compel Stalin to sign a peace. Obviously, there's no way to know what would have happened. You know, we have to make some hypothetical guesses here, but that's my suggestion for what they could have done differently, and I'm curious to hear what you guys think about that. Mr. Benjamin said, "Hi Tik, would you mind sharing your slides about the differences between ideologies and the fascist Third Way? I would like to adapt them into a teaching aid for my Army Reserve unit, thank you." Not sure which ones you're talking about, but what I'll do later this week is upload 2 infographics to my Instagram. If you guys didn't know I had an Instagram, you can find the link in the description. The first of the infographics will be this picture. It's an updated image of the information from the differences between Hitler, Mussolini and Mosley video. It's all the same, I've just added a bit of information at the bottom. The second one will be this one on Third Positionism, and I think this is the one that Benjamin wants because this was in some videos years ago. I have updated it slightly, so it's now titled The World View of Third Positionism. And just to confirm, this is how they see the world, not me. I don't see the world like this, and I no longer subscribe to the left and right thing, but obviously they do believe in left and right, so I have to use left and right to explain their position. So there is a difference between how this was in previous videos and now, because I've learned a bit more and have been able to clarify things. This isn't a perfect way of putting it, so I'm sure I'll update it again in the future, but it's the best I can do right now. And in a nutshell, Third Positionism sees a split between left liberals and right liberals, both of whom are run by the Jews, of course, with the fascists and National Socialists in the middle. The bottom reads, Third Positionists view the left and right as having the same ideological doctrine, liberalism, which they think is the root of all evil in the world. They believe that right and left are on the same side. Capitalism leads to Marxism. So their third position is meant to be the spiritual cure to this disease by preventing the right devolving into the left. And I've chosen the word spiritual deliberately there since it is a spiritual ideology. To give context to this, I have been watching some third positionist content in order to see what they're saying, and I don't think I can name the channel in question that I saw, but there was a third positionist describing third positionism as a spiritual collectivism. I feel I need to do a video on this and go into more detail, but in a nutshell, they think that the collective spirit of nationalism will defeat the collective spirit of liberalism. And while they may not see themselves as a religious cult, they are in one. It's Gnosticism, which I also need to do a video on. But the problem I have is that I don't think I can name the channel I'm talking about because we live in La La Land, where responding to someone bad means that you somehow support them, and I don't want to be accused of promoting that type of content, even though I'm clearly not. Know thy enemy, know thyself, and you need not fear the results of 1,000 battles. So we need to understand fascism and National Socialism in order to defeat them, thus we need to know what they're saying. So I don't know what we're going to do there, but I really want to give you guys the knowledge of Third Positionism so that we can prevent history from repeating. It's also very interesting to see what they have to say, especially because I can see the cultish elements in it. It also confirms that what I've been saying about these ideologies is correct. I've got a good grasp of what fascism and National Socialism are. It also confirms that they're collectivists and are proud of it. So I'm not sure if I can link to their videos, but I do want to do a video on modern Third Positionism at some point soon. Evgeny Mitasov said, "Hi Tik, hope you're doing well. Recently became a patron because I love your work and happy to support, as there is not much English speaking content out there based on modern day research and truly analytical work. Many present day books are either projecting 50 years old antiquated view or are using no data driven narrative and cross-reference each other. So, considering what he's about to say, the irony of this sentence being so badly written is not lost on me. Finally, a good source, Tik, that I can recommend to many English speakers that are interested in war, land war history, without too many caveats." What are the caveats? "He sucks at banks, he should stick to tanks, and Soviet Union, good union. In Soviet Russia, unions nationalize you." Currently covering all your materials to make sure I know them in detail. Now on to the question comment. I know you get this question a lot. Why are you not using Russian-speaking sources? And you gave many answers like to Yuri in Q&A 30 ? I like how this sentence is actually two sentences merged into one. It really emphasizes the point I'm about to make, but I will point out that I do use Russian sources. Anton Jolly provided me with some. There's Alexei Isayev, who is great, and I refer to his book in the Stalingrad series. And there was Igor Kobiakov as well. So I did use Russian sources, but there were problems with using Russian sources. Setting aside the pro-Russian nationalism and even propaganda at times, the biggest issue was the translation issue, as you're about to find out. However, I would like to recommend you a few things. Rather wordy story, but please bear with me, it might be useful for the channel. As you know, there are primary and secondary Soviet sources that researchers can use, and it's impossible for an English speaker to read them. However, there are a few Russian sources that you can actually use by leveraging some modern day technology. Right, let's just stop you there. I think this is where the problem is, and it's not just the Russians, but the Germans, the Italians, and even other English speakers as well. There's been so many occasions where I've said something, and people in the comments have said that I said something else than what I actually said. I think some of this is because people aren't listening, they're too busy reacting, but also I think it's because there's a language barrier. It's bad enough between English speakers, let alone foreign languages as well. You know, the Germans are arguing over the meaning of the word Gleichschaltung. If they don't know what Gleichschaltung is, how can we know? And then we have 100 other languages with multiple interpretations of certain words, and it's just a mess. To say, just use Google Translate, bro. No, sorry, it doesn't work as well as you might think. In the Gleichschaltung video, I use Google Translate for the word Leistungsgesellschaft. It said it means meritocracy. But if I hadn't shown the screenshot of Google Translate saying this, if I had just stated that Google Translate tells me it's meritocracy, there would have been people protesting in the comment section accusing me of lying. As it was, I did show Google Translate, so there were only a few people who complained that the word doesn't just mean meritocracy. Also, this guy, who at the very least has a Russian surname, was complaining that I had used Google Translate, saying I become more surreal with every video as a result. He, who has a non-German name, also says that young German natives have no idea what the word was used for 80 years ago, because apparently he thinks that young Germans can't open a history book. But don't worry, because he, as a non-native German speaker, knows more than my German viewers, many of whom are not young. Some of my audience are actually old. Obviously, some are young, but on average, I don't have a young audience. Only a quarter of my audience are less than 25 years old, so 75% are older. That's not a young audience. And, by the way, I'm proud of this because overall I have a mature audience, which is a good thing. But user AR said, "There is no such word as privatization in the German language. That is Google Translate being stupid, and you guys not fact-checking it. Privatization is English spelt wrong. Privatizerung is German. What do you think one must think of your videos when you can't even get the titles right? You guessed right, nothing," which is what you'll own and you'll be happy. So not only are things being lost in translation, but people are complaining on the odd occasion when I do use Google Translate. And there's at least one idiot who thinks my videos are nothing and can be dismissed because I didn't use the German translation of the word privatization, even though I'm not German and nobody would click on the video if the entire title was in German. So well done, idiot. Here's another example. I've learned that the English word quite has two meanings. I use it to mean positive. Oh, that's quite good, meaning that's more than good, pretty good. Whereas other people use it to mean the negative. So, oh, that's quite good, meaning that's less than good. Therefore, I don't use that word anymore, or very rarely, because I noticed that some English speakers were saying I said stuff that I didn't actually say, and it turned out it was because their interpretation of the word quite was different to mine. My point here is that everything is getting lost in translation. In my video comparing the ideologies of Hitler, Mussolini and Mosley, people said I was wrong because nationalism had to mean race, and that I was stupid for not knowing this, even though it doesn't mean that. If they had read their own scripture, Mein Kampf, Hitler talks about this. He points out there's a difference between racial nationalism and the old bourgeois nationalism, as he calls it. In fact, Hitler was an early pioneer of the idea that races were nations, so even their Führer knows this, but for some reason they think I'm stupid for pointing this out. So words mean different things to different people, even in one language, let alone in multiple languages. To answer the original question, if I throw a bunch of Russian text into Google Translate, you can imagine the disaster that would follow from that. In fact, I have done that in the past, but I'm less inclined to do that now because I've learnt that that's problematic. And I think this is where a lot of non-native English speakers or people relying on Google Translate are failing to understand what I'm saying. Back in the day, in my early videos, I would repeat the same thing 2 or 3 times in different ways. The reason why was because I was hoping that the real message that I was trying to convey would get through the translation filter. If I explain a concept in 3 different ways, then there's no way that someone could misinterpret that. But then English speakers complained that I was repeating myself and wasting time, so I stopped doing that, and I've just suffered with the criticism ever since. So let me make this super clear to everyone listening to this. There is a translation issue. There is a meaning issue. When I say certain words, I mean one thing, whereas some assume it means something else. A lot of people are getting false translations of what I'm saying by using Google Translate. A lot are also missing my sarcasm. And as a result of this and more, people are sometimes misinterpreting what I'm saying and coming to false conclusions. We need to realise that a lot of the disagreement we're having is because we're not using the same language or the same meanings. We have the historic meanings versus the more modern meanings, we have language barriers, and in addition, there is a drive by a certain sect of society to change the words we use to make them double plus ungood. This is the Gnostic cult of the Hegelians, who are saying that nothing is real, nothing is what you think it is, and the racist and misogynistic patriarchal society that we definitely live in, sarcasm, has distorted the language, and thus we need to abolish all the words we use so we can go live in the land of puppy dogs and rainbows. So there's a deliberate distortion going on right now on top of the already problematic translation and meaning issue, all of which is massively complicating the crisis of meaning. My immediate suggestion to you all is to try to understand what I'm trying to convey rather than fixate on the words themselves. I know that's a problematic thing to do, but at the very least, don't assume that I'm stupid or that I'm deliberately distorting the meanings. It could be the case that I know your meanings of the words, but that I have a different perspective from you. In such a case, rather than attacking my character or preaching your case, you could be curious and ask me to explain it. What's the harm in that? And by the way, some of the sources that Mitasov lists in his message are just random documents or a YouTube channel. Now yes, some of these are primary sources, etc., but you've got to remember that even the primary sources in the Soviet Union are biased, just like the German ones are, and may not be telling the truth. No politician tells the truth, so why would these political armies, Wehrmacht or Red Army, tell the truth? There's lies in the primary sources. So not only have I got to use bad translations, but also somehow detect the lies within the sources. And as much as I might be capable of doing that in the English sources, I don't think I'm in a position to do that with non-English sources that haven't already been translated by a human. I'm concerned that I might mess it up and create myths that end up accidentally distorting history. So by not using foreign sources that haven't already been translated into English, I'm playing it safe. You might disagree with that idea, and that's fair enough, but at least you have to appreciate where I'm coming from. And I would also say that if it wasn't for the Soviet Union being as despotic as it was, then we wouldn't have had the Iron Curtain, and we would have more Russian sources in the West that counter the pro-German narrative, just like you guys in Russia would have more Western sources that counter the pro-Soviet narrative that you guys believe in. A lot of my Russian viewers seem to be of the view that only the West succumb to lies, and that the Russians know the truth. No, you guys are equally being told a bunch of pro-nationalist lies. Worse, the Russian law prevents the historians from pointing this out to you. And it's not their fault, but the Russian historians cannot give you the truth. You are being propagandized with a state-run pro-Russian narrative. Yes, it's not the historians' fault as such. They don't want to be put in jail, and I understand that. But when you're reading your own literature, you need to be asking the question, but is this really the case? You also need to be open to the idea that the way you view us in the West as being ignorant of the lies, which is true, is exactly how we see your ignorance when it comes to Soviet or Russian nationalism. Many in the West have succumbed to lies, and so have many of you. And a lot of you are not even conscious of this. You said many present-day books are either projecting 50 years old antiquated view. What, like the Brest Fortress siege propaganda, which we're about to get to in a second? You guys are also buying into an antiquated view. Your perception is distorted, and this should become obvious to you as I answer the next question. AI Schmelzer said, "Hi Tik, I recently stumbled across a relatively recent Russian state-funded documentary on World War II. I was surprised by it being far more factual than I thought. Here's the link. It is kind of a longer version of what Russians today learn in school. Do you think it is less wrong than what the US-UK curricula is?" The documentary in question is the Soviet Storm series. They did play this on TV here in the UK back in the day. I don't watch TV anymore. And I can tell you that it's incredibly pro-Russian. I'm coming at this from as neutral a perspective as I possibly can do. I don't care to promote either pro-German or pro-Russian nationalism. Nationalism is a spiritual idea that isn't my cup of tea. And I understand that we had decades of pro-German propaganda, and I'm fighting against that all the time on this channel. But you don't counter pro-German propaganda with pro-Russian propaganda. You don't stoop down to their level. You do what I'm trying to do, which is try to present as balanced and as non-nationalistic a perspective as possible. Now, we don't always get this right, but at least we attempt it. You might think I've failed to do that, but you've got to give me credit for trying, at least. But when it comes to this documentary, there was no attempt at balance. There was no attempt at neutrality. It's like, yep, pro-Russian propaganda, let's go! And that's fine because they've made this primarily for Russians. But I think anyone else who asks the question, but is this really the case, will see through it straight away. About 8 minutes into the first episode, for example, it says that the Red Army was dispersed across the Soviet Union, and then shows circles of units deep inside the territory. This implies that there was next to nothing on the border. But that isn't true, is it? A lot were on the or near the border, and it also states the Soviet divisions were at peacetime strength. No, they weren't. In consequence, most Soviet rifle divisions within the western military districts were increased in strength from their peacetime establishment of 6,000 men to 8,000 to 11,000 men, out of an authorized wartime strength of 14,500. It even admits that they had 5 million soldiers, and it says they were in the middle of a mobilization, which is true, but it doesn't call it mobilization, because to call it a mobilization implies that Stalin was increasing the size of his army, possibly wanting to attack. If not, why would he mobilize? However, if they admit this, then the mobilization goes against the narrative that they're trying to push, that Hitler launched a preemptive strike against the innocent Soviets. Now, I don't agree with Suvorov's preemptive strike narrative, but I also don't agree with hiding what was going on by avoiding the word mobilization. They could have just said that Stalin feared an attack by Hitler, so was mobilizing just in case. But then that would go against the narrative that Stalin was incompetent and surprised, which then means that the Russians can't just blame Stalin, which is what they want to do. So it's all interconnected here, and they're doing their best to put a pro-Russian or pro-Soviet slant on it, which leads them to make questionable conclusions. There's so many problems with the video, we'd be here all day. It doesn't mention that the Soviets had the largest number of tanks in the world at the time. It says the Soviet troops were in 3 echelons, which implies to the reader that they were divided into 3 neat rows. But no, they were mostly at the border. And then it says that there were fewer Soviet divisions than the number of German divisions, which is true, but the division sizes are different, so it's a false comparison anyway. They say the Red Army was outnumbered. Again, true, but only at the border. They do say that the Soviets had more planes and tanks, but then add that these would be of little value, without explaining why. Well, it's because the Soviets lost the most manpower, and so to place emphasis on the tanks or planes would take away from the sacrifice of the Soviet people. The Soviets lost the most manpower, so we've got to emphasize that over everything else. But in reality, tanks and planes are very important. I do like how it refers to the Axis-Soviet Pact as an alliance, though. That's really nice. And I think they made a mistake here, since all the Russian viewers of mine are so adamant that it's not an alliance, yet here is a pro-Russian documentary admitting that it was. They also suggest that the Germans lost a lot of bombers on the first day because Soviet pilots took to the skies, which is a questionable statement because we have evidence of the total opposite. In the recent confrontations with German bombers, our young pilots realised that 7.62mm SHKAS machine guns were of no use. They fired and fired at the German bombers, but with no result. To be honest, we all became pessimistic. They say that although the Soviets had many good combat aircraft, their fighter pilots lacked the experience of the Messerschmitt fighter pilots. I have a video on this period of the fighting, and no, this is not true. The Soviet fighter aircraft were awful, and their pilots had no experience. So they're giving real facts alongside false ones. It also talks about the fortress siege of Brest, where the heroic Soviet defenders held on for a month, because it has to distract you and tell you how great and heroic the Russian soldiers were as the rest of the army was getting completely destroyed. It's like, if you're going to make a 44-minute episode on the first days of Barbarossa, you haven't really got time to talk about the exception to the rule. The overall picture should be that the Soviets were caught with their pants down, not, oh, these guys over here did something heroic. And it's irrelevant anyway because the Germans just bypassed the fortress. The German attackers in Panzergruppe 2 caught the Soviet defenders by surprise, quickly crossed the Bug, bypassed the fortress of Brest-Litovsk, which held out until 12th of July, ignored enemy units on their flanks, and advanced rapidly to the east. Literally, that's all Fritz says about it, because it was a minor thing, and it's arguable whether it lasted until the 12th of July. Some say it lasted a week. Wikipedia says there was a random shootout about a month later which resulted in a Soviet officer getting captured, but the documentary implies that the Soviets fought continuously for a month. No, that's not what happened. But because there was so much post-war propaganda about this fortress for some reason, the Russian authors put this propaganda in their documentary, suggesting to me that this documentary is also propaganda. It does say, eventually, that the Soviets had 10,000 tanks. No, they had 22,600 tanks, most of which were on the Axis Soviet front. It does say that they were mostly light tanks, which is true. However, at about 23 minutes in, it says the Germans had 4,000 tanks and assault guns against the Soviets. So it's 10,000 versus 4,000, but then downplays the Soviet tanks as being mostly light tanks. And yes, it does mention the German light tanks, but it doesn't mention the command tanks or the Czech tanks. And if you take them out, you're left with 1,671 medium tanks and assault guns. So, instead of 10,000 Soviet light tanks versus 4,000 German tanks, it's 22,600 Soviet tanks, 1,400 of which are medium tanks, versus 3,903 Panzers, of which 1,671 are medium tanks. And even if we said that 10,000 Soviet tanks were against the Germans, it's still not a good ratio. The point being that they're playing with the numbers to try and excuse the reason why the Soviets lost so many tanks, which comes across as manipulative, when in reality there's no need to hide anything. The tank numbers alone don't tell the full story. The Germans also used Stukas, anti-tank guns, anti-tank infantry weapons, mines, and more in their combined arms warfare doctrine to destroy the Soviet tanks, a lot of which broke down and had to be abandoned on the way to the battlefield. So instead of just looking at the tank numbers and trying to manipulate those numbers to say that the Soviets weren't as bad as they actually were, they could have explained that the Germans used other methods to destroy the Soviet tanks. That's a much more honest way of doing things. And because they decided not to be honest, it makes me question the integrity of the rest of the documentary. So my conclusion here is that Russian TV documentaries aren't necessarily better or worse than Western TV documentaries because they're all of questionable quality. Yes, this one's more up-to-date than some of the older documentaries, but it's equally as biased. It's not balanced at all. There's false information in it and it comes across as disingenuous. This is why we've got to try and come at history from as neutral a perspective as possible. You've got to abandon your nationalism and be critical of your own side. People often say that I'm critical all the time, and yes, exactly. I called Churchill an idiot for a reason, because I'm trying to discover what happened. I'm not trying to prove that one side is better than another. I'm not on anyone's side. But this documentary is, which is why I don't think it's any good. And in regards to whether it's better than the US or UK education, it's time for me to tell you a story about my school years. I can only speak about my own education, I cannot say what others are learning in school, but when I was in year 9, so age 14 I think, my teacher announced to the class that next week we're going to look at World War II. And I was incredibly happy, I was buzzing, I was like, yes, finally I'm going to get some decent history for a change, not more of this Vikings wear horned helmets nonsense. And I was really looking forward to it. A week went by and we sat down ready for the class, and I was focused and everything ready to go. And the teacher told us about Nagasaki and Hiroshima. That was our World War II lesson. And I've never been so disappointed in my life. And this isn't to say that Nagasaki and Hiroshima aren't important or aren't part of World War II. Of course they are. But there was no context. It was more about the start of the Cold War than of the Second World War. He didn't mention Hitler, Mussolini, Stalin, nothing like that. Apparently World War II was purely about 2 cities in Japan getting nuked. That was it. As a result of this, I was put off from learning history completely. I didn't take history as an option in the final 2 years of school. And it was only by chance that I decided to take history again when I went to college. I was focused on English at that point, not history. It was only because when I spoke to the history teachers, there was a bunch of texts on the table about the interwar period, and the lady history teacher said that she was going to teach us about German history from the 1850s to the 1950s, including the build-up to the Second World War, and the other teacher was going to cover Britain in the same period, and it was for that reason that I decided to give history another chance. Now, they didn't cover the war itself, and they gave me a Keynesian and socialistic education, which was a major factor in me becoming a socialist. However, I have to give my college teachers credit for making history interesting again, and teaching me a lot of the methods of history, some of which I still use to this day. They were good teachers overall, even if their worldviews were flawed. My university teachers were terrible, and the subjects they chose were a joke, but at least my college tutors were good. So my point here is to say that, yeah, of course your Russian state propaganda documentary is going to be better than my education at school. The UK state is a joke, and so the UK curriculum is also a joke. And I can say this now, if it wasn't for the history in college, I could, hands on heart, say it was a waste of time for me to go through any state education. It was completely and utterly pointless. And don't even get me started on the other subjects. Schools are nothing more than a state-run babysitting enterprise. I would have been much better off learning a trade or developing other skills rather than getting into thousands of pounds of debt for some joke degree. And yes, history is a joke degree. I don't recommend that people take history as a degree, if you even have to get a degree at all, because all you're getting is a worthless piece of paper that has no relevance in the real world. People have said that I should go back to university and get a PhD. Why? What purpose would that serve? It's not going to do anything. I've never once had to get my degree out to show it to people. It's not even up on the wall. It's at the back of a wardrobe. And I can't in good faith recommend that anyone go to university these days. Maybe for an engineering degree, but certainly not for history or social studies or philosophy. You can study that stuff as a hobby. You don't need a gender studies degree to work at Star Schmucks. If you've watched my channel for any length of time, especially if you've seen my 2 videos on history theory, then you've got all the theory you need, and you've got plenty of examples of how history can be done. So there's no real reason to get into massive amounts of debt for an education that you've already received. The only difference is that you're not writing essays for me, and you don't get a certificate at the end, which is next to worthless anyway, so it's not worth the debt. Anyone can buy 20 history books on a given topic of your choice and write out an 8,000 word essay answering a question that you've decided that you want answering. Then you can publish it online and get the feedback. There you go. You've done history, and you've done it for a couple £100, depending on the price of the books, not tens of thousands. I know there's teachers who watch my channel and they're likely to be crying in the comments trying to justify their jobs, but it's clear that the old education system is on its way out, and rightly so. That's why they're panicking and doing all this woke stuff to try and coax you back in, which brings us to the next Q&A. Aaron Curley said, "Hi Tik, love your content, especially when you dive into the economic and political factors of World War II. I like to consider myself a pretty well-educated person, and multiple times now your videos have allowed me to realise how I was engaging in massive oversimplification of the core issues, and/or buying into some of the dishonest modern narratives of the various aspects of World War II. Keep doing what you do, but always ensure you take time for yourself periodically to recharge. The hamster wheel never stops, sir. The hamster wheel never stops. I have a request. My 2 brothers and 1 sister and I are all young adults, and while only one of us so far is married, my sister, who just had her first child, I have no doubt that more kids will be on the way. We were all homeschooled growing up, and my sister already intends to homeschool her kids. I would encourage that, 100%. It has its downsides, but you've seen the benefits. I don't have kids, but I've learned from history and I'm not repeating it. They would be homeschooled, unless it's physically impossible for some reason. You know, you do you, but that's my stance on that. Even if we don't all homeschool, we all think your videos are absolutely mandatory curriculum for any kids of my siblings and me. Thank you, I'm glad to hear that. My concern is that, given certain current political trends right now, which bear striking similarities to the lead up to World War II, by the way, I'm not sure your videos will always be available on YouTube. It's my fear as well. I do have a BitChute channel, but it sucks. It won't let me upload any more videos. Other people have suggested other platforms, but none of them seem viable. YouTube is the place to be, unfortunately, but maybe I'll bite the bullet and pick one at some point, and when I do, I'll let you guys know. I hope this is simply paranoia on my part, but I think I would like to retain a local copy of a number of them just in case the platform suddenly decides to later remove them as too sensitive or too out of line with the narrative. If I were to make offline copies, are you okay with this? I really respect the copyright of YouTube creators, so I wouldn't want to be so bold as to download them without your permission first. Let me know. Best regards, Aaron Curley. PS, I would only be sharing them with my family and close friends. Yes, you have my permission to have local copies. In fact, I would encourage everyone to do the same. If anyone wants to do a response video or use the footage to enhance what you're trying to say, like the channel We Have a Problem did recently, link in the description to that video, it's a good channel for British people, then you can use clips from my videos for that. YouTube itself might kick off about it, but I'm not fussed if it's a genuine response video or whatever. Reaction videos where people just sit there watching and saying the odd word and not really contributing to the debate, I'm against that because that's stupid and lazy content. But if you're genuinely adding to the discussion or the debate, then yeah, sure, go ahead. I've given permission before to Chinese people who asked if they could upload my videos in China. I mean, it's not like I can get behind the Great Firewall anyway, and I can't stop you in that situation. But if you want to risk your life to upload my content in China, it's your life, you do you. But yes, I'm happy for you to take copies. Make sure you download the 2 copies of the PDFs from the Hitler Socialism videos. They're in those videos' descriptions. And yeah, I'm surprised that I haven't had more problems from the powers that be. In fact, you can clip this part of the video for future use. My critics are currently defaming me and saying I've said stuff that I haven't actually said. They're just pulling this stuff out of the ether to paint me as a racist or worse, despite the fact that the race does not exist. I believe in individuals, not groups. And I've got numerous videos where I'm calling out all those bad ideologies that thought in terms of race and so on. I have videos on the big H of World War II where a lot of people died, and some of them have been suppressed by YouTube itself. But despite this, my critics are painting me as something that I'm not, and the reason why they're doing that is so that once YouTube has taken my channel down and all the evidence has disappeared, people won't be able to verify what I did or did not say. And the primary evidence they'll have is r/sad history on Reddit, where all they're doing is lying about me. This is what Eric Vogelin called out in the 1950s. He said that all sources of criticism for the Gnostic faith are boycotted and defamed so as to enact a voluntary censorship of the adherents. The faithful member of a movement will not touch literature that is apt to argue against or show disrespect for his cherished beliefs. And that's exactly what they're doing. I have criticised their beliefs. They refuse to even consider it. I am basically Satan in their eyes and therefore must be exorcised, purged. So if YouTube does delete me, Assume the bad things they're saying about me are wrong before you assume they're right. Jay Johnson said, "Hi Tik, I really appreciate what you do, especially the stand you take against historical falsehoods and downright lies. As a high school history teacher in California, I was removed from the classroom for insisting that these naughty boys perpetrated this event, and a dozen other inflammatory comments. I am a Scots-Irish American and have a big mouth. Keep up the good fight, the truth is our only hope." So guys, I was stood in the middle of a boxing ring with Mike Tyson and I said that I was the greatest boxer of all time. Why is he now beating me? Your mistake, well, you made a few mistakes, was not realising the situation you were in. 1, you're in California, the epicenter of woke. 2, you're a high school history teacher trying to teach kids? No, dude, the primary role of a school teacher is to babysit the children. If you were there to educate them, you wouldn't be teaching them history, nor would you be teaching them other useless subjects like English. They can already speak it. You know, algebra, that super useful thing that comes up all the time in the real world. So teachers aren't there to teach. The miseducation system is not there to educate. The corporate state wants to abolish the family, as Karl Marx said in the Communist Manifesto. Women are to become corporate drones along with the rest of us. Therefore, they don't have the time nor inclination to look after their own kids. They're not to be mothers, they're to be strong and independent fish bicycles. And so, you teachers are the substitute babysitters. That is the red pill truth of the day, class. And so, you did everything wrong here, sir. You tried to tell the truth in a system that's built on a lie, and therefore you were thrown out. I hope you've learnt your lesson. And to all the teachers out here, if what I've just said doesn't fully register, or you have doubts, there's a channel by Aaron Cleary that I will link to below. He will make this fact blatantly clear for you, and he's hilarious. I recommend that everyone take a look at his channel, if you haven't done so already. Search for teachers or teaching or anything else, like he's got topics on everything. And your homework, Jay, is to binge watch his videos and take notes. He actually has videos on California that I think you should watch. But anyway, back to the question. In my novel, When Darkness Fell, Their Darkest Hour, I remake the Nazi economy prior to the outbreak of World War II. The link is below. In chapter 14, the main character, Wolfgang, meets with the Reich Economic Council and lays out a few changes. The Nazi bureaucrats loudly complain and teeter on the edge of rebellion. Albert Vogler declares the changes can't be done. Richard Darre and Herbert Bacher get so angry when Wolfgang insists that Germany will modernise its agriculture with tractors that they try to kill him. The chapter ends with Germany moving forward with my economic changes. I would like your opinion on what I've created as I begin to write the sequel, When Darkness Fell, Midnight over Moscow. Economically, Nazi Germany really takes off, much like fascist China in the last 2 decades. The Nazi economy entered hyperinflation in January 1945, and that was before the Soviets reached German soil. The Allies were on German soil, but not really. So the cause of the hyperinflation wasn't the Allies or the Soviets. They may have contributed to it, but the real cause was the Reichsbank printing of currency. The quantity of Reichsbank notes doubled between 1933 and 1939, it doubled again between 1941 and 1944, and then doubled again in 1945 alone. Due to the wage controls, price controls, etc., this was a command economy, and so people had to go to the black market in order to buy stuff. But the point is that this wasn't a thriving economy due to the Nazi policies. Read The Vampire Economy by Gunter Ryman, and you'll see this. It's free at Mises.org as well. The only reason we think they did well was because they bent over backwards to tackle unemployment in the early years and then staved off price rises through wage controls and then stealing goods off the rest of Europe, as Gott's alley shows in Hitler's Beneficiaries. But if they hadn't done that, their economy would have collapsed a lot earlier. There was no economic miracle, and even Richard Overy has said this. And the same applies with China. There's a channel called China Uncensored, which is ironic because YouTube often censors them, but the guy who hosts it is hilarious, and there was an episode where they discussed how the Chinese don't really have toilets. They are supposedly the second greatest power on Earth, and they don't have many functioning toilets. They built a bunch of public toilets, and you can go to them, but they don't work because they're not connected to anything. They're just there for show. There's no plumbing. Some of them do have plumbing, but others don't. And then you've got the ghost cities, as well as unfinished high-rises that they're having to knock down, and their office chairs explode. There's also loads of articles at Mises.org explaining why China isn't as strong as we've been led to believe. And it all comes down to the fact that it's all fake. GDP figures are fake anyway, and yet you think that the Chinese economic figures published by Beijing are true? It turns out, and I know some people might be shocked to hear this, but communists lie. The Soviet Union collapsed for a reason. I have a video on the Soviet economy. The Chinese economy isn't much better. It's all fake, just like much of our economy here in the West is. I understand you're writing fiction, however you do say, but I don't want the novel to have a fantastical sheen. Economically, I want it to be based in gritty reality. Okay, Economics in One Lesson by Henry Hazlitt, and then The Vampire Economy by Gunter Ryman. At the very least, you need to watch my videos on Hitler's Socialism and the other videos on Hitler's ideology, and Orwell's 1984 isn't far off the mark either. I need to talk to somebody about the Nazi economy. Chapter 14 of my first novel is 18 pages long. Let me know the easiest and cheapest way to send you a copy, or I can email the chapter to you. I would be happy to pay for your copy and your reading time. I haven't got the time nor the motivation to read fiction. And I just can't. I've never really enjoyed fiction. Orwell is an exception, but that's because I see it as an allegory. I think that's the word. And I'm saying this despite the fact that I did NaNoWriMo once, and I won it. I have 64,000 words of a first draft of a sci-fi novel written, despite the fact I hadn't read space sci-fi when I wrote it. And yet here I am saying I don't like reading fiction. So I'm not going to read your novel, but I have given you publicity, and I'm sure some people might be curious enough to buy it, and I'm sure they'll give you all the feedback you need. I would say, though, that you're writing fiction, so you should be concentrating on the characters and the story, not the setting. If you have to have Darre burying the fallen Aryan dead in the soil and then doing a spiritual Thule ritual that somehow goes wrong, and then the Aryan Super Saiyans re-emerge as Nazi zombies, but then they're fighting the real Nazis for domination? Yeah, it could be Nazi zombies versus Nazis. Subtitle, Who's Got the Real Magic Blood Now? There you go, there's your $1 million idea. I expect the check in the post. Norbert Purcell has said, good job on Table Talks. History is a painstaking process. It is good that you pointed out. When I was at university, there were two methods of history. First, the Nomothetic, and second, the Idiographic. Both need to be considered. I'll be honest, I've never heard these phrases before, but they are relevant because I've actually been saying something like this in my videos. I don't care what some dead poet said from 350 years ago, every man is an island. Just because you and I breathe doesn't mean that we are the same. We might share some traits, we might share elements of the same culture we're in, we might live in the same country and speak the same language, but we are not the same. We are individuals. For convenience of language, we might say that a group of people are English or they are German or whatever, but a group is not a solid entity. I cannot go outside and touch England. England as a solid object does not exist. There is no nation. It's not a physical thing. It's a spiritual concept. Another spiritual concept is men as a group. All men are not the same. All women are not the same. They are not monolithic groups. They do not exist as a solid entity, only as a convenience of language. However, if we perceive the group to exist as an entity, then we have actualized that concept into existence. And that spiritual process of believing that the entity known as the state, or the race, or the gender, or the nation exists is what Giovanni Gentile called actualism in the fascist doctrine. Apparently, according to one viewer, it's now known as actual idealism. Gentile used both terms, actualism and actual idealism, but if you Google it, it's actual idealism you need to search for, so thank you to the person who pointed that out. Well, when it comes to the terms nomothetic and idiographic, according to Wikipedia, this is that distinction, and if I've got this correct, which I might not have, nomothetic is that we're all in social groups and that we are all part of the monolithic social group, so all within the social group, nothing outside the social group, nothing against the social group. Whereas idiographic is that we're all individuals and that the group may have an influence, but we shouldn't judge the individual based on the group. If that is the correct interpretation of those terms, then I'm 100% idiographic. However, Wikipedia then says the terms are a bit different when it comes to anthropology, so I'm not sure about any of this, to be honest. But I would still favour the idea of concrete individuals over a fictitious collective that doesn't really exist. Norbert went on, the Bible is a prime example. Many consider the Bible to be traditional stories. But what happens when it mentions an established historical fact? What happens when a set of traditional stories mentions an actual historical person whom we know lived and breathed? Thank you, Lewis, and may the Jesus bless you. If you're not sure, that's a reference to Richard Carrier, who calls him the Jesus. I think by traditional stories, you mean fables? You know, is the Bible giving a literal account of what happened, or has it put some history in there and is filling in the gaps with fantastical stories designed to teach you an important life lesson? A lot of ancient and medieval history does that, because its primary purpose isn't to give us an objective history of the past, but to tell us spiritual stories, somewhat based in reality, that convey ideas and teach us how to live. That idea might seem alien to us today, and it is, but they had a completely different worldview back then, and it's really difficult to describe that worldview, and I'm not going to attempt it here. But what matters is that, to them, spirituality and reality were basically two sides of the same coin. Whereas I would say that reality, or the evidence, must come first before the interpretation. To them, reality was created by God, or the gods. So evidence is inherently spiritual. For the purposes of this discussion, if I write a fictional book on the Nazi economy and Darre is there resurrecting zombies, Darre is a real person who lived. But he'd be a surrogate or a proxy for a real-life person. So is my Darre a fictional character? Yeah, but he's based on a real-life one. In my opinion, a lot of what Colonel Adam wrote in With Paulus at Stalingrad is like this. He didn't have a stenographic record of what Paulus said, so he made up a load of stuff that Paulus might have believed but probably didn't actually say. He's writing paragraph after paragraph of what Paulus supposedly said many years after he supposedly said them, which is highly unlikely. And people were arguing with me saying, well, I would have remembered. No, not paragraphs worth, but it might be a good approximation for what Paulus did say or believe, and we can't rule that out. It could also be a good record of what the German generals and Halder also believed after the war. Therefore, it's difficult to say how much of this fictional Paulus is true or not, because he is a proxy. Same with many of the other memoirs by other generals and so on. People had to insert what they remembered people saying, including themselves, and made up a bunch of stuff on the way, which is why a lot of the sources contradict each other. Were they wrong in doing this? Was it a mistake or a deliberate distortion, or is it a necessary evil? I guess that depends on each individual source, but these are the questions we have to ask, and this applies to modern history as well as ancient and medieval history, where they were even more liberal with their account of the past. So when the Bible mentions real historical figures, we have to understand that they sometimes might be fictional characters based on real people, or even groups of people who may or may not have said or done the things that the Bible says they did. And it could also be the case that they replaced an entire cast of people with one guy, just to make it easier to tell the story. So as historians, what we do is use multiple sources to collate a convergence of evidence to prove or disprove whether something happened or not. We don't rely on one source, we use multiple to overcome the bias of any one source. The problem is that this is a struggle for modern historians studying a war from 80 years ago, let alone a vast period of time over 2,000 years ago. So I don't envy scholars, doing ancient history because the sources aren't exactly plentiful. This means that a lot of the history we read has many holes in it, especially in ancient and medieval times, but also in modern history. Some of it will genuinely be fiction. And even though I'm absolutely pro-evidence and fact, we kind of have to accept this reality. History is the study of the human record of the past, not the past itself. We can't physically go back in time and study the past, we can only study the records that were left behind. So, if a record exists, it was made by human hands, powered by human minds. Therefore, human belief is in that record one way or another. There may be elements of fiction within every single account in history. Unless we can prove or disprove something, then we're left with a subjective interpretation or belief about that thing. And there's nothing we can do about that. It's part of our reality. I don't want to go further down the rabbit hole today. We can do a deep dive in the future if we needed to. But I would say to Norbert that when it comes to the Bible or other scripture, it's down to you. If there's no concrete evidence to disprove something, and no logical case for why it didn't happen or exist, which is why the debate is important, then it's up to you to subjectively decide for yourself. Is it a real person? Did he really exist? Did he say that? Is he a proxy or is he fiction? At the point where we're not really sure, you get to decide what you believe. For this next question, Smelzer is making a response to something I said in the Nigel Askey video. If you haven't seen it, I'll leave a link in the description. Hi Tik, in defense of the Lancaster Square Law. This is from a Russian point of view, where it also isn't called Lancaster Square Law, but Ossipov-Lancaster equations. Yes, Ossipov made several because the simple basic Lancaster one clearly doesn't fit with the data of just about any battle, so why are we trying to defend them? If they don't work, then what's the point? There is no law in warfare other than listen to your logistics guys, you morons, or great S will happen, and yet here you are trying to turn warfare into a hard science. Basically, Ossipov-Lancaster equations are a start. And so, simply, they will basically never apply to any actual situation. Did you think before you wrote any of this? The equations don't work, the math doesn't allow us to predict the future, therefore we've added a bunch of extra nonsense on top of it to make it more complicated and thus appear more sound. No, they don't work. They're not the start of anything. It's impossible to predict the future using quick maths. I know the Gnostic priest known as Karl Marx used mathematics to predict the coming of a utopian future, which still hasn't arrived and his maths has been proven to be completely false. And I understand that a lot of people today buy into the idea that we can somehow predict the future using maths and science, but let me be the first to wake you up to the lie. No, you cannot predict the future. Marx couldn't do it, Joachim Flora couldn't do it, Nostradamus couldn't do it, and neither can Ossipov. Therefore, the foundation of the idea is fundamentally unsound. Using Lancaster equation to model a battle is, well, like using a simple suspected infected recovery model to predict indoctrinated sheep standing in the street and clapping for their NHS. What the Russians actually do to make these still wrong but useful is the following. Again, did you think before you wrote any of this? They're still wrong but useful. No, they're wrong. They're incorrect. They're useless. You have bought into a lie. I don't know how else to put it to you. You cannot use maths to predict the future. 2 plus 2 does not equal utopia. You cannot do it. And yes, I am being harsh on you for a reason. I want you to wake up from the obvious fiction. 1. There is a factor denoting which proportion of the force is actually contributing to the battle. 2. Combat efficiency is different depending on attacking and defending. Duh. 3. An empirically derived factor, more like a sigmoid function, is included that symbolises the loss of cohesion, and thus the loss of combat efficiency spelt wrong from taking losses. Actually, this is non-linear, and the shape of the S-hour geyser routing function is up for a lot of debate. Yes, because it's a load of nonsense. Why don't the so-called experts agree on this point? Oh, that's right, because they're making it up as they go along. Also, humans route much easier on the attack than on the defence. Do they? Maybe that's the Russian experience. I wouldn't necessarily say that is the case. From what I've read, people on the attack don't tend to flee the battlefield, so I'm not sure where you're getting this idea from. This is psychology. War is insanely stressful, spelt wrong. The human instinct is to be in shelter, and the defender defends shelter while the attacker marches out of it. But dude, Nigel Askey says that defending is worthless, and that attacking has the advantage. And he was using the Lancaster equation, so, clearly your maths must be off. And yes, that was obvious sarcasm for all the Google translators. What the Russians believe is that routing happens when the results observed by the troops are greatly contrary to their expectations. Essentially, parts of the bystander effect, it's okay if I rout, the other guys of whom there are plenty can still do it, as well as some other psychologically well-known effects, frequently conspire to make the relatively larger forces more routify, not a word, than the smaller ones. Larger forces rout more than smaller ones. Really? Did you just say that? I mean, I think this might be the Russian experience, but this has nothing to do with what you're saying. It turns out that mass conscript armies where people don't actually want to fight, but are either forced to sign up or sign up because the rations are better, don't really want to be there. They don't want to fight. So when they go up against a smaller, more professional army, they get crushed. They don't want to be there and they don't want to fight, so they flee or they cower or they get killed or whatever it is. And we've got to factor in the fact that the Russian experience is one of authoritarian dictators, from the Tsar to Lenin and Stalin through to Putin. The Russians have never really had freedom, and thus their army has always been of doubtful quality. At times they've had good units and some good commanders, but overall it's been questionable. And maybe that's why the Russians have concluded that a larger force is more likely to rout. Yeah, that's probably what the Russians have learned through experience, but that experience isn't universal. A corollary, spelt wrong, from this is that even if a Russian Soviet commander knows he outnumbers his foe, he will not tell his troops. He will also not trash talk the adversary's capabilities in front of his men. You still cannot predict a battle with this, but from thinking about it in these terms, you can derive relatively interesting rules, such as never tell your mean that they outnumbered the enemy, even if they do know that they outnumbered the foe over the entire front. Say that the enemy is concentrating forces against them. Never badmouth the enemy's capabilities. There is literally no advantage whatsoever to do so. Yes, we have a term for this. It's called mushroom management. Keep them in the dark and feed them bullshit. As an ex-manager myself, I know a lot of people subscribe to this idea, but I disagree with it on a fundamental level. This is a clash between two worldviews. On the one hand, we have those who believe that only the elite can know anything, gnosis, and thus all power must be in the hands of the elite. They're the ones who give you instructions and you follow them. Don't you dare take the initiative. Don't you dare do anything that might undermine the power of the elite, because you guys haven't been touched by the Holy Spirit of God like the elite have, so you can't possibly know anything and you should just trust the experts, bro. The other worldview is that if given sufficient knowledge and training, individuals can act for themselves and take responsibility for those actions. They can manage themselves. You can delegate responsibility to those below and allow them to make on-the-spot decisions without your input. They can make far more decisions than you could ever make, and their perspective might be different to yours since, ground-on experience, and so they'll often make better decisions that you would have made anyway. Therefore, the whole enterprise would then run better. Yeah, it does technically mean less power to you if you're interested in power, which I'm certainly not. However, the benefits massively outweigh that loss, if you even want to call it that. The people below you can do their jobs without you needing to micromanage them. It shows an incredible degree of trust, which is the foundation of every relationship, and a leader that shows trust in his subordinates reaps the benefits of doing so. The job gets done better, and you get to not do as much micromanaging, which means your workload is less. But of course, you can't grant freedom to those in a totalitarian state. You can't allow the individual to make their own decisions in a conscript army, because in doing so, they will decide to leave. Most of your army will dissolve. Your socialism will disband itself as the market, the individuals, want to be free. That's why the Russian state has chosen mushroom management. Keep you all in the dark and feed you BS. And it's not just you, unfortunately. It's us in the West as well. All equations governing human behaviour are wrong. All your base are belong to us. Yes, a meme from 1998. But some can be wrong in one word, in a useful, spelt wrong, matter. There's nothing right with this sentence. Let me try rewriting it properly. All equations governing human behaviour are wrong, but some can be wrong in a useful manner. Everybody's equal, but some are more equal than others. This is straight out of Orwell. This is Gnostic doublethink. You can't be wrong in a useful manner. No, sorry, not happening, right? You cannot use math to dictate human nature. We are not machines. We are autonomous creatures, sovereign individuals. Every man is an island. The fact that I have to spell this out is unbelievable. Ossipov-Lancaster, whatever. It's all garbage. Life is not a simulation. Dorian Shearer said, talking so much about the economies of World War II, I would like to see a video about your personal channel finance management. I would really want to know how it is to manage a channel with such a small number of subscribers comparing to other YouTube channels in such a small niche like history and investing so much money and time for creating these videos. Here are some questions. Is the channel sustainable? As it currently stands in terms of money, yeah. And that's thanks to my patrons and subscribe stars. Without them, this channel wouldn't be possible. Certainly not in its current format. Had I not had patrons or subscribe stars, I probably wouldn't have risked going full-time when I did. At which point, I doubt that the channel would be where it is in terms of subscribers or videos. It just wouldn't have happened. I think I still would have been at like 100,000 subscribers, and most of the videos you've seen in the last 3 or 4 years wouldn't have happened. And this is why I feel extremely guilty for not being able to reply to people on Patreon or Subscribestar, or not answering all the questions you guys have asked. I just haven't got the time to do everything. In terms of money, the channel is sustainable, but in terms of workload, I'm struggling, and I have been for a while, as many of you know. I've actually been working on this video for a while as well, but I've been reluctant to release it because I don't feel it's up to my usual standards. You guys might enjoy it. Maybe I put too much information in some of the other videos, and I think there is an argument to be made there. But I don't want to release too many of what I consider to be subpar videos where I'm just really just giving you my opinion on a lot of stuff. I've not really introduced anything new here today, and I've not really done much research for this. So in my opinion, this is not a good video as a result of that. And I'm judging it before it goes out, but that's how I see it. I've got a bunch of Patreon questions on economics that I haven't answered because I don't want to let you guys down, even though I'm letting down the people who ask those questions. And what do I mean by that? Well, I get the impression that a lot of my patrons and subscribe stars, who I rely on, want tank stuff. They don't want bank stuff. Some do, but most probably don't. So my impression is that I can't release too many bank videos in a row, even though I've just done that, because I will lose financial support and then have to stop making videos. So I've put the economic questions to one side, answered a bunch of tank ones, and now I have so many economic questions that I don't know what to do with them. I will have to answer them soon because I can't ignore them for much longer, but I'm scared that in answering them over the course of a few videos, it will lead to a drop in views and support, even though they are Patreon questions. You know, it's silly when I think about it. And this is all as a consequence of the backlash that I had from the woke crowd over the socialism issue. It's really thrown me off, and it's been difficult to gauge what people want. And by the way, I feel extremely guilty for every question or message that's been left unanswered. It'll take me years to get through the Q&A questions that I already have, you know, that has already been asked. So in that sense, it's not sustainable. The workload is simply too much. It's not sustainable. So all I can do is apologize at the moment. I've overpromised and significantly underdelivered, which is the biggest deadly sin. Is it growth sustainable content that you put on it? Are you planning to hire animator? Yeah, it's growth sustainable, and I've got a self-employed animator working for me, but they're struggling with the Stalingrad animations, and it's made me realise just how much work I was doing with that. However, even if they were going as fast as I can go, it wouldn't save much time. It would with the Premiere Pro stuff, but not with the Blender stuff. And I'm still trying to figure that out, but anyway. How much money do you get? It varies, and I also don't really want to say. I've got friends and family watching this, and I don't want them all to know my personal business. I will point out that if I was just on YouTube ad revenue on its own, it wouldn't be enough. I'd still be in retail. And I'm pausing to emphasize that because my patrons and subscribe stars are the ones who make this possible, and I try to put that message in every video because it's true. Without their support, weekly videos would go away and I would end up finding another job. That is why I feel like I should keep working and put off my social life like I did this weekend. I cancelled on some of my friends in order to get this video done so that I didn't let you guys down. So, you know, it's hard work, but I'd rather do this than anything else. How much are you living for yourself? I'm not. I'm at my desk most of the day. I get to see my friends and family on occasion. I get to watch YouTube or play computer games in the evenings sometimes, but yeah, this is my life. I'm just working all the time and hardly ever get a day off. I've taken 1 or 2 weeks off here or there because I burnt out, but the algorithm hates me when I do that, so I'm reluctant to take more breaks. And when I do, I can't relax because I'm anxious about losing everything. You know, I also fall even further behind with the reading and scripting, so it's not worth taking time off. I've just got to keep going. Are you putting something aside for your retirement? What, with 11% inflation, when the Bank of England had to step in a couple months back to save the entire pension sector? No! For starters, no pension scheme is paying above 11% inflation. So by putting something aside in a pension scheme, you're losing value. And as I said not long ago, the entire pension system nearly collapsed in this country. So it's not happening. By the time I get to retirement age, there won't be a retirement age. You'll own nothing and you'll be happy. So I'm not planning on retiring. And if I was, I wouldn't be putting my cash in a retirement fund. That, in this current system, is insanity. You're better off in gold and silver. And in British pounds, by the way, gold has just hit an all-time high. Ding. And I want to make this clear. If we had a free market economy where there was no tax, no inflation, no regulation, no central state banks, then yeah, I would consider having a pension scheme. But in this current system, if you can even call it that, there's no way. It's too risky. The entire system is insolvent and on the brink of collapse. So you're better off out of the system than you are in it. Are you planning to sell merch like the map of Stalingrad? Love your channel, love your work and dedication. No, not selling merch or the map, or not doing sponsors or anything like that. Ad revenue and Patreon and subscribe star support is what I'd rather rely on. So now obviously I'm taking a hit financially by not doing merch or sponsorships, but I'd rather not do them. I explain why in the 30-hour Stalingrad behind the scenes video, so I'd say just go and watch that for the full answer, but basically I don't want to take away from the quality of the videos. So thank you for your questions. Sorry it took so long to answer. There's loads more questions, but I'll have to leave them for another day because this is going on way too long. So let me know if you like me to do another long Q&A video like this or not. I could have done each question individually, but I thought I may as well get them all done together. So yeah, thanks for watching guys, bye for now.